Manuel Bojorquez has been on the ground in Surfside, Florida for several days. He joins us now to discuss the latest. Manuel, thank you so much for being here. As I mentioned, you have been covering this story from the beginning. What new information are we learning today from officials?
We learned the death toll has gone up. They were able to recover 3 additional victims after the demolition of the building, which you could see right here over my shoulder before, that part of the building that is still standing. But of course, as you know, it had to be demolished for the safety of rescue workers. The death toll now 27, with 118 unaccounted for. And the governor mentioned a few interesting items about the demolition, that 20 minutes after the demolition, they were able to get rescue crews back in there to start looking again, and that the area that they were able to access now, because they don't have that unsafe structure looming over them, is where a lot of master bedrooms are or were, and that they feel that this will help accelerate the recovery or the search for victims because many of them were asleep when the building collapsed. So they're hoping to bring more answers to a lot of the families that are still waiting and still really hoping against hope that there could be a miracle in the rubble.
And about those rescue efforts, what is it like now that the building has been demolished? And are officials still considering this a rescue operation and not necessarily a recovery one?
Out of respect for the families, every time we hear them address this issue, they say search and rescue, because they want to give people hope and they want to let them know that they're doing everything that they can to find anybody who may still be alive. But obviously, those hopes dwindle as more time goes on. But what was made clear by officials today is that the demolition of that part of the building that remains standing was a very tough decision, because you had family members or survivors who had all their things still in there, and it was not an easy decision to make. But because that structure was unsafe and it loomed over the rescuers, they weren't able to reach some of the areas and the part of the building that collapsed. Now they say they're able to get to those areas. So they're still considering the search and rescue, and saying that now these crews can continue to work with the danger of that building, that unsafe structure still there. You'll recall last week they did have to stop the search at one point because they thought that part of the building might be coming down on its own.
And watching that footage, it's just so incredibly heartbreaking, and you can't help but think of families who are losing everything, losing their homes, families who are still looking for loved ones, still unaccounted for, as you mentioned. In your conversation with some of these families, how are they reacting to watching what happened in the demolition of this building, and just overall, how are people feeling and reacting?
Well, we know one survivor who lived in the part of the building that was demolished last night said that officials suggested to him not to watch the demolition because it might be just so painful to watch not only his home being demolished, but again to relive the trauma of that night when the initial collapse happened. There was one instance of a woman who tried to file an emergency motion to stop the demolition. She believed her cat was still in there. The judge denied that. And because, as county officials had been saying throughout this event, that they had been trying their best to locate any pets that could be in that building, and they had not found any. So it's yet another heartbreaking chapter. There's no way around that. To see something crumble again, it reminds you of that initial collapse, and it reminds you that people have lost not only loved ones, but their homes, and it will be difficult for them to get back on their feet. But as you've heard officials say, FEMA is here and trying to help them start that process.
That's right, the governor detailing how much more there is to do. You mentioned that the building had to come down, of course, but how does this impact the investigation into what caused the initial collapse?
It's a double-edged sword as far as the investigation goes, because clearly investigators would like to get in there and see what was intact and be able to see for themselves what may have triggered the initial collapse. They won't be able to do that anymore because it was brought down. But it does give them the ability to go in there and pick up the pieces of the rubble, of pieces of the building, bring them to a warehouse where they can continue their forensic evaluation, looking at the materials, trying to determine whether any of the materials used in the construction of the building 40 years ago could have had something to do with this. So yes, it's not the best thing as far as the investigation to have the rest of that building be demolished, but they will do what they can to continue to look for answers as far as what triggered the initial collapse.
And another thing complicating these search efforts is tropical storm Elsa is approaching. At least 9 million people are in Florida are now under storm watches as warnings came out this morning. What kind of impact is this going to have on these search efforts?
Well, the good news, a bit of a sigh of relief here on this side, the east coast of Florida, is that it appears the tropical system is headed west. They're not letting their guard down, but they don't feel that it will have any direct impacts. You could still have some of those outer rain bands, affecting this area. And that, of course, is a problem because there's wind and there's rain. And we know from just the typical summer thunderstorms that have happened throughout this search and rescue phase that it is dangerous for rescue crews because the rubble becomes slippery and they cannot operate if there's any lightning in the area. So yes, it does appear the storm is headed west, and that's a good thing for the search and rescue efforts here, but there is still the potential for impacts from that tropical storm.
Something that we'll be following over the next couple of days. Manuel, thank you so much for your reporting on the ground and for keeping us up to date. We really appreciate you being with us.
Thank you.